You can learn a lot about a man by pondering some of his last words. This is especially true if his death is particularly painful and strenuous. Once everything has been stripped away, every distraction is gone, and time on earth is coming to an end, what parting message does he have for those who remain? That depends on what kind of person he is. Let's look at three examples: Jesus, Mohammed, and Nabeel Qureshi. Before his crucifixion, Jesus was lashed with a Roman flagrum, which was made with leather thongs with chunks of bone or metal woven into the strands. We know historically what a flagrum would do to a person. We have ancient reports of people being beaten until their veins and arteries were exposed. The Jewish historian Josephus writes about people being flogged until their bones were showing or until their intestines spilled out. The first century philosopher Seneca describes victims of crucifixion as battered, misshapen, and deformed, due in large part to the beatings they received. After the scourging came the crucifixion. The Romans hammered large nails through Jesus' wrists and ankles to keep him firmly attached to a wooden cross. Now, as Jesus hung on this cross, barely recognizable, skin dangling like ribbons, muscles and inner tissues exposed, covered only by his own drying yet still flowing blood, what message did he want to convey to those who were gathered around him? He said in Luke 23:34, "Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing." This is the same Jesus who told his followers in Matthew 5, "You have heard that it was said, 'You shall love your neighbor and hate your enemy.' But I say to you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, so that you may be sons of your Father who is in heaven. For he causes his sun to rise on the evil and the good, and sends rain on the righteous and the unrighteous." So during his ministry, Jesus ordered his followers to love their enemies and to pray for their persecutors. And when he was crucified, he practiced what he preached. He asked the Father to forgive the people who had tortured, mocked, and crucified him. Jesus' example clearly had a tremendous impact on the early Christian community because just a little later, when Stephen, the first Christian martyr, was being stoned to death, he cried out, "Lord, do not hold this sin against them." Fast forward 6 centuries, and we get to Muhammad, who was poisoned by a Jewish woman whose family had been slaughtered by Muslims. Muhammad didn't swallow enough of the poison to kill him quickly, but the poison did cause internal damage, leaving him in ever-increasing agony. His followers eventually had to carry him around while his legs dragged behind him, and Aisha said that she never saw anyone experience as much pain as Muhammad did. As Muhammad lay dying, his internal organs shutting down due to the effects of the poison, what message did he want to pass on? Sahih al-Bukhari, 435. Narrated Aisha and Abdullah ibn Abbas. When the last moment of the life of Allah's Messenger came, he started putting his khamisa, a woolen blanket, on his face, and when he felt hot and short of breath, he took it off his face and said, "May Allah curse the Jews and Christians, for they built the places of worship at the graves of their prophets." The Prophet was warning Muslims of what those people had done. So Muhammad wanted to warn his followers not to build a mosque at his grave, and there are lots of ways he could have done this. He could have said, "Guys, don't build a mosque at my grave." But he decided to make his point by calling down Allah's curse on Jews and Christians. He didn't want Allah to forgive them, he wanted Allah to curse them. Muhammad's dying prayer was for Jews and Christians to be cursed. I should point out here that Islam's second holiest mosque, Al-Masjid al-Nabawi, in Medina is built over Muhammad's grave. So if Jews and Christians are under Allah's curse for building places of worship at the graves of their prophets, Muslims are also under Allah's curse for building a place of worship at the grave of their prophet. Since polytheists and atheists and others were already under Allah's curse, Muhammad, on his deathbed, cursed everyone who hadn't already been cursed: Jews, Christians, and even Muslims. If Allah takes Muhammad's final prayers at all seriously, everyone is doomed. Fast forward another 14 centuries, and we have Nabeel, a follower of Muhammad, who becomes a follower of Jesus. And we can see the impact Jesus had on Nabeel in Nabeel's last recorded words. Nabeel's internal organs were riddled with cancer. His stomach had been removed. The doctors had given up on him and had stopped feeding him. And he understood that they were just going to keep him heavily drugged until he died. This was his last chance to share something with the world. And what was his concern? He wanted everyone to know something about the God he served.
You know, our God is a God of love. And that should be what keeps us driven. That should be foremost in our mind. So whether you're talking to a Hindu, a Jew, a Muslim, a Christian, whoever you're talking to, may it be out of love.
And he wanted people to understand that even though he had been criticizing Islam for years and telling Muslims that they're wrong about God and Jesus, he wasn't doing that out of hatred. He was doing it out of love. He wasn't telling Muslims that Islam is false because he hated them and wanted them to feel bad. He was telling Muslims that Islam is false because he wanted them to know the God of love. And he apologized for times when his love to others wasn't clear.
You know, I think it's very important that we discuss matters of truth. But at the end of the day, that is supposed to be undergirded by love and by peace. And so if at any point I've said anything that seems to contravene that, I do apologize. And I hope that that's not the legacy that I leave behind.
So, Jesus' final message before death: Father, forgive these people for torturing me, spitting on me, and nailing me to this cross. Stephen's final message before death: Lord, they're stoning me, but please don't hold this sin against them. Nabeel's final message before death: God is a God of love, and if I haven't seemed loving enough towards you, please forgive me. Muhammad's final message before death: Allah's curse be upon Jews, Christians, and Muslims. In the words we learned on Sesame Street, one of these men is not like the others. So we've seen a striking difference between, on the one hand, the parting thoughts of Jesus and Nabeel, and on the other hand, the parting thoughts of Muhammad. But we may need to do another comparison, because I've seen some Muslims boasting about Nabeel's death and insisting that it proves he was cursed by Allah. Notice their obsession with Allah cursing Jews and Christians. I wonder where that came from. Now, as Nabeel said in his last video, he wants people to come together to the truth. So we may need to do a little investigating to see what we can learn from Nabeel's death. And the best way to do that with our Muslim friends is to take the claims they're making about Nabeel's death and to examine what Islam's most trusted sources say about Muhammad's death, to make sure our Muslim friends are being consistent in their reasoning. That would be the loving thing to do. So I hereby invite every Muslim in the world to share your thoughts about Nabeel's death in the comments section. In return, I'll share two things with you. One, a bunch of information about your prophet that you never knew before because your leaders hide it from you. Unlike your leaders, I love you enough to tell you the truth. And two, some indisputable proof that my loyalty to my friends does not end at death. Once we've gotten Islam's massive consistency problem out of the way, perhaps we can have a more fruitful discussion of what's called the problem of evil, or the problem of suffering. If God exists and is perfect in power, knowledge, and goodness, why do things like stomach cancer happen to people like Nabeel? That's one of the most important theological topics in history, and I'm happy to address it. But consistency is crucial for topics like this, and there are lots of Muslims out there who are so busy shouting Allahu Akbar when a Christian dies that they don't realize how utterly illogical they've become. Fortunately, I can help them with their inconsistency by quoting their sources to them. And maybe, as we move forward, we can all learn some things about God, even in the midst of tragedy. Let's talk again soon.